Okay, in this session of How to Read the Bible, we're going to talk about translations because a lot of people, they just don't know which one do I buy, which one do I pick up, and help me understand a little bit more why we have different translations. So, obviously, the original text was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. So that was the original language of the text. Predominantly, Old Testament's Hebrew, New Testament is Greek, predominantly, and a little bit of Aramaic. And so this particular translation that I've got is the New International, the NIV from 2011, and that is what some of the scriptures have been through this series. Now, let's just talk about this particular translation for a second to help us understand how much we can rely on the translation itself. So in 1978, over 100 scholars were chosen to craft this translation of Scripture. It was from 5 English-speaking nations, because obviously the NIV is an English translation. So that means that there is international scope, representing over 20 different denominations, so to help safeguard from any bias when interpreting the text and translating it for us. And there's still a committee of the Bible translation that was formed to make any subtle adjustments if there is any changes in modern language. Okay, and so there is rigorous research has gone into the original meaning of what the writer was considering, with like thought patterns and syntax and contextual uses, idioms, sentence structures, everything. And so when they translate the Bible, this is what they do. It's this thing called text criticism, and it has internal text criticism and external text criticism. So I want to talk about this because I believe it's important. So the scribes' choice when copying text for consistency is they had such a reverence in the Jewish culture when duplicating scrolls and scribes that they exercised extreme care when making copies of the Hebrew Bible. Seriously, like the process was specified in meticulous detail to minimize the possibility of even the slightest error. The number of letters, words, lines were all counted so that the middle letters of the Pentateuch of the Old Testament were determined, and if a single mistake was discovered, they would actually throw away the entire scroll and start again, and they would destroy it because they wanted to make sure they had so much respect and reverence towards the sacredness of scriptures and the importance of their roles. So the quality of the Hebrew Bible actually surpasses all other ancient manuscripts. We can really trust the quality of it. So then in 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and this is the external quality. As we look at external things. So there was the internal process of transferring over the text and copying it over, and then how many different of those versions actually align, and there's very little discrepancy that can be found in them. If anything, it's just like maybe 1 or 2 words here and there, but it's really quite minimal. And then there's external evidence, which is what was the text that they actually used. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls, 1947, were discovered then, and that actually dated original writings 1,000 years older than what they were previously using to produce translations, which was the Masoretic text. And so, in spite of the time span, the number of variant readings between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text is quite small, and most of these variations are simply in like spelling or style or something small like that. And so when we talk about the external, we're talking about these other sources that they would look at as they're producing the Bible, and it's the Masoretic text that we've talked about, which was the copying of scrolls, and then the Dead Sea Scrolls that then predated that and gave us additional references that we never had before 1947, which is really remarkable for any translations after 1947. And so that dated between 300 BC and 100 CE, Common Era. And then the Septuagint, which was the ancient Greek translation, and this is what Jesus used. And in the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found copies of the Septuagint. So they're cross-referencing all this stuff in order to produce the translation. So you kind of get the background of how these modern language translations are produced. Now, there's a scale. So the scale goes from one side to the other side of how close to word for word it is, and then just kind of more like thought by thought. So let me explain this a little bit, and this should help you and I choose what versions we're going to actually read and study from. So if we go all the way over to one side, we see the literal version, or otherwise known as the formal equivalent, which is word for word. So that would be like the King James Version or the ESV. This is like they're just literally taking each word at a time and translating it into the modern language. Sometimes, though, this actually doesn't help us with our current thought process and working out the meaning. So it's not totally helpful for everyday reading. Then you can pendulum swing and go over to the other side of the scale, which is what we call free translations or free versions, which are paraphrased. So these are idea by idea. So this would be like the Message version or the New Living Translation. Now you shouldn't be taking the Message and studying it as if it's like trying to do exegesis from the Message translation. You need something that's closer to the text. You can use the Message in New Living in these things in addition to your study to help you understand it, but not as your sole text. So in the middle, you've got something that's called the dynamic version or the dynamic equivalent version, which is combining readability with text integrity. So this is the version that I've got, which is the NIV or the New American Bible or something like that. And so really, if you're really doing a deep dive into the text, you're probably cross-referencing a number of translations together, but for everyday reading, you likely want something that's more in the middle of the scale. So understanding and choosing the right translation will help in how to read the Bible.